The text is Proverbs 11, 24 through 26. There is that scattereth and yet increaseth, and there is that withholdeth more than is meet, but it tendeth to poverty. The liberal soul shall be made fat, and he that watereth shall be watered also himself. He that withholdeth corn, the people shall curse him, but blessing shall be upon the head of him that selleth it. Proverbs 11, the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Father in heaven, we commit this time to you and ask you to bless it. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Let's see. So I want to talk about this evening about the generous soul, or subtitle might be Money is Seed. Right? Money is seed. Let me point to the texts again. There's the guy that scatters and yet increases, and there's the guy that withholdeth more than is fitting, but that tends to poverty. So there's one guy who hoards, and that tends to poverty. Another guy scatters, and yet it increases. And then it says in verse 25, the liberal soul, that is the generous soul, shall be made fat, and he that watereth shall be watered also himself. So this is a way of saying that output is something that results in input. The more you water, the more that you the more you give, the more you receive. And then he that withholdeth corn, the people shall curse him, but blessing shall be on the head of him that selleth it. So the person who's open-handed and generous, blessing comes back to him. John Bunyan, who wrote Pilgrim's Progress, wrote a little piece of doggerel, little poem that goes something like this. There was a man, some thought him mad, the more he gave, the more he had. And that's what we're talking about tonight. There is a way of giving that is actually receiving. There's a way of giving. Now, you could withdraw all your money from the bank and get rid of it foolishly. You could deposit it in a Canadian bank, for example. Or you could rent a helicopter with it and scatter your money, all over, fly over the town and drop money. That's giving money away, but that's giving money away foolishly. So there's a giving away foolishly that wouldn't result in a return, just like a farmer who put seed corn on the parking lot. He broadcasts seed, but there's no return. But there's another way of broadcasting seed onto plowed ground that gets a return. So here in the 11th chapter of Proverbs, we find 3 proverbs, all 3 in a row, aiming at the same target, and all of them hit the bullseye. So, in the scriptural idea of economics, in the scriptural notion of how economies work, money is seed. Money is your seed corn. And if you're stupid with your seed corn, you're going to starve. If you are selfish with your seed corn, you're not going to prosper. If you are intelligent with your seed corn, then you're going to be blessed. Because it is seed, there's a way of throwing it away that's simply throwing it away into the ocean, let's say. Or there's another way of throwing it away into the soil, say, that returns it to you 30, 60, and 100 fold. Now, that means money is seed. Money is seed. Now, behind this is a basic economic rule, basic economic principle that if you learn, it's going to protect you from many, many, many errors. It's going to protect you from errors in your personal finances, and it's going to prevent you from voting for the wrong guy. The problem is many people think that when it comes to money and finances and the economy, that life is a zero-sum game. A zero-sum game is simple to understand, and it sometimes applies, but it usually doesn't apply when people assume that it does. A zero-sum game works this way. You've got a pie in the middle of the kitchen table, and you've got 5 roommates. There's 6 of you total. So 6 of you and 1 pie. Now, if someone starts to cut the pie, and he cuts a quarter of the pie into the first piece, and you see by the glint in his eye that that's the piece that he intends for himself, a bigger piece of pie for him means a smaller piece of pie for everybody else, right? That's what a zero-sum game is. Bigger for him is smaller for others. Bigger for him is smaller for others. And when that's the case, it is truly a zero-sum game, all right? Now, and there are a handful of places when you've got one pie and none of the roommates are going anywhere and you're all hungry. Okay, that's a zero-sum game. Let's say you've got 3 roommates all interested in the same girl. That too is a zero-sum game. Well, and you ought to be thinking about that more than you are. Because more for one person is less for others. Right? Zero-sum game. But the fact that it applies in limited areas like that, where there's only one gold medal in the Olympics, there's only one girl that 3 guys are interested in, there's only so much pie to go around, the fact that it has limited application in those areas has led to an enormous, just enormous trouble in our public life when it comes to finances and the economy. Because the way God made the world, the generous soul shall be made fat. The person who puts seed in the ground, the person who puts in seed corn in the ground, receives back 30, 60, and 100-fold. God has built a fertile world. Because the world is fertile, there is such a thing as a return. There's a return. If you're a farmer, there's a return. If you invest your money, there's a return. If you invest in a business and you start the business up, there's a return. And the return is bigger than what you put in. So let's take the farm example, 30, 60, and 100-fold. That is not a zero-sum game because in God's world, many of the pies grow. The pie gets bigger. All right, and because everybody assumes when they're throwing elbows in budgetary hearings in Congress, when they're doing that sort of thing, they're assuming that the amount of money that's available for everybody is a static, fixed amount. And so when the other guy got more, he got a portion more, and everybody thinks, and that means less for me, and so they start fighting. But in the public economy, the pie grows, the GDP grows, the gross domestic product grows. There's more available because God prospers certain kinds of activity. Now, and greedily sniping at other people for getting more is not the sort of thing that he blesses. Now, here is Paul saying the same thing in 2 Corinthians 9, verses 10 and 11. Now he that ministereth seed to the sower, both minister bread for your food, and multiply your seed sown, and increase the fruits of your righteousness, being enriched in everything to all bountifulness, which causeth through us thanksgiving to God. So Paul is teaching in 2 Corinthians here, the seed that he's talking about is money. He's talking about how the Corinthians handle money. And he says, he that gives seed to the sower ministers bread for your food and multiplies your seed sown. So God gives corn to the farmer and he gives money to you. And just like he multiplies the return for the farmer, he multiplies the return for you, being enriched in everything to all bountifulness. So this is the way you want to learn how to live. You want to be, it's crucial that you don't stop at the wrong place here. You want to give in order to get, in order to be able to give again. Now, many people just get part of half of the verse or half the principle, and they say, well, I'm just going to give to get. Like I'm going to play God like he's a Vegas slot machine, and I'm going to give in order to get, and when I get my pile, then I'll just sit on it. But the biblical principle is the farmer gives in order to receive, in order that he may plant again the next spring, in order to receive, in order that he may do it again, and continue to grow the crops until he accumulates wealth, and he can invest in other places. He can give in other ways. So you should want to give in order to get, in order to be able to give again. John Wesley put it this way: earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. Earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. And that's a disciplined walk. That's a disciplined way of living. And when you give all you can, there's a return on it. It's not willy-nilly just throwing money away. It's intelligent giving, where you're able to say to the Lord, Lord, I'm about to put this seed in this dirt. Now, I want you to imagine God explaining farming to Adam. Okay, now, what you do is you take this stuff. I can eat this? Yes, you can eat this. But I don't want you to eat it. What I want you to do is I want you to put it in the dirt here. Okay. Really? Are you sure? I mean, because that's the weirdest thing in the world, right? That's the weirdest thing in the world. Where did you get your bread? Out of the dirt. Where'd you get your toast this morning? Out of the dirt. Came up out of the dirt. And it's just simply bizarre. Now, I want you to imagine this. Work with me, and I'll get back to my point. The Israelites were in the wilderness for 40 years. So imagine that the Israelites are all 10 years into the wilderness, which means, and let's say a young man-child was born 10 years in, and he grows to be a 20-year-old young man, which means at that point, they've got 10 years to go. All right, so he's born smack in the middle, 10 years on either side of him in the 40-year wilderness. And one day, this 20-year-old man, 10 years away from the invasion of Canaan, is chatting with his mom, and he discovers that she thinks that there are countries where bread doesn't come from the sky. His whole life, bread comes from the sky. And she said, where do they get bread? Where do they get bread then? Well, from the dirt. No. That'd be stupid. You're pulling my leg. One time when Nancy was driving to Pullman, I think, many years ago when our kids were little, one of the kids was staring out the window of the car and said, Mom, where do farmers get their food? And she said something like they grow it. It was something like that. And he said, don't they know how to cook? Okay, so we take a lot of things for granted. God gives us things from the dirt. God gives us things from the dirt. And he gives you, not only does he give you corn and grain and peas and lentils, but he also gives you strawberries and blueberries and huckleberries and oranges and apples and every kind of apple there is. And if you thought about it for a minute, you might start to conclude that God is extravagant, right? God could have nourished us with the culinary equivalent of unleaded gasoline, like just a bowl of porridge that tastes like nothing, right? And you could have had one taste bud that would enable you to tell whether it was hot or cold. But God gives you this extravaganza of tastes. And not only that, but he gives us the ingenuity of, hey, what if we put this with this? Suppose we put this taste with that other taste. Maybe we'd get a new taste, right? Maybe we'd get something else. And maybe we could make sauce. Or maybe we could do this. Well, God is generous. God is liberal. And becoming generous this way, becoming a liberal soul, a generous soul, is becoming like God. All right, so God is extravagant. We want to learn how to be extravagant the same way God is extravagant, not stupid extravagant. All right, so in this passage of Proverbs, the same basic truth is expressed in three different ways. In verse 24, it says there's a man who scatters, but somehow increases his store. And there's another man who holds back more than he ought to hold back, and yet his stinginess does not preserve his wealth. It tends rather to poverty, it says. In short, the open-handed man increases in his wealth, and the tight-fisted man comes into hard times. And the man is tight-fisted because he says, I want to make sure I've got enough for me. And as a result of making sure he has enough for me, he doesn't have enough for me. And the person who's thinking of others, the person who's generous and open-handed, is blessed. This setup is counterintuitive to the foolish. They think, well, no, if you want it, you have to hang on to it. And if you give it away, it's gone. If you give it away, it's gone. Well, there's a certain kind of giving away that's gone, but there's another kind of giving that's intelligent. You're putting it before God into rich soil. That means you're giving it where God's word says to give it. In the next verse, in verse 25, it says, the liberal soul is made fat. The one who is a source of water to others finds at the end of the day that he is well watered himself. Giving is receiving. For the regenerate soul, giving is a way of receiving. Remember the story of the woman at the well in John chapter 4, where they stop at the well, Jacob's well. Jesus sits there to rest. The disciples go into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman comes out to draw water, and Jesus asks her for a drink. And she says, that's kind of weird. It really was weird, because he was a Jew speaking to a Samaritan. That was weirdness number one. And he was a man speaking to a woman. That was weirdness number two. Weirdness number three was, I think, noticed by the disciples when they came back. All the way through the Old Testament, what happens when a man meets a woman at a well? Every time, it's a wedding, right? Every time. Moses, Jacob, a man meets a woman at a well, there's a conversation. So the disciples come back and go, ah! That's why I think the reaction was behind that reaction. And they want Jesus to take some food, but Jesus says, I have food you don't know anything about. So they went to get food because he was hungry, but Jesus, by giving, by conversing with this woman, is nourished himself. Jesus receives by giving. And and you might say I'm stretching a little bit on the man or the woman at the well. Well, let me test you. Let's say you're watching a movie and a girl wakes up late, slept in, looks at the alarm clock, jumps out of bed, gets dressed hurriedly, runs down the stairs of her apartment and runs into a guy. Knocks him over, he's got coffee, he spills it everywhere. What is going to happen? How do you know? How do you know that? Well, it's a motif. It's a set. It's the way we tell stories. It's a setup. That's the way the Old Testament sets up that kind of story. That's one of their motifs, right? So then, next verse. After that, the hard-driving merchant brings the curses of the people down on his head. And this is what we in modern parlance would call price gouging. But a merchant who has grain available and makes it readily available receives the blessing of the people. And notice that this merchant is being generous by selling. So not all generosity is giving. Right? Sometimes you give free and clear. Sometimes you're being generous by giving a discount. Sometimes you're being generous just by selling and not hoarding it in order to drive the price up, in order to sell it at a higher price later. You're being open-handed. So you can be open-handed selling, you can be open-handed selling at a discount, and you can be open-handed giving or loaning. What matters is the demeanor or the attitude. So money is seed, and it needs to be treated like seed. Money is seed, and it needs to be treated like seed. And you might say, but I'm a poor college student. I don't have any money. I don't have any seed. Or I've got one thin dime. I've got one seed. Well, plant it. All right? You plant it. Say, you've got one thin dime, ask God who you can give it to, where it would make a difference. Say, now here's a problem. There's always a problem. Something is going to get in the way. In Proverbs 13:4, we've got the problem, an intervening temptation that we might call the problem of lazy wants, lazy desire. Proverbs 13:4 says, "The soul of the sluggard desireth and hath nothing, but the soul of the diligent shall be made fat." Now you couple this with the Proverbs that I just cited. The soul of the sluggard, he wants to consume, right? He wants to take in, he wants to get. He desires and he doesn't get it. He wants and he doesn't get it. But the soul of the diligent shall be made fat, meaning he's going to be able to give, and he's not going to be hungry himself. He's going to give, and he's going to not be in need of someone to come around and help him out. Another way of thinking about work and finance and economy and money is this: when you were born into this world, our economists are accustomed to speak of you guys as consumers. How many consumers? You may have seen charts. How many gallons of milk you will consume over the course of your lifetime? How many tons of beef you will consume over the course of your college career? How much you will take? Well, we're all born into the world with one mouth and two hands. Right? I take this as a parable. We're supposed to produce twice as much as we consume. And when we produce more than we consume, the end result is wealth. When we consume more than we produce, the end result is poverty. All right? When we produce more than we consume, that's wealth. When we consume more than we produce, that's what poverty is. By that metric, the North American continent was overpopulated when Columbus landed, because the Native Americans were having trouble feeding themselves. A population that can feed itself is a population that's producing more than it consumes. All right, so you should think of yourself, if you're thinking like a Christian, if you're thinking like Reformed, world-engaging Christian, you should be thinking about, you should think of yourself as a producer. You're a worker, you're a producer. You make things, and you make things, you contribute more than you take away. And the fact that that's true, that that's a possibility, is what makes the society not a zero-sum game. If everybody in the society is producing more than they consume, the pie is growing. If everybody's consuming more than they produce, the pie is shrinking or staying the same. And then it really is a zero-sum game, and then people really do start fighting one another for the bigger piece. So, a lazy man can want the fruit of having labored without having a willingness to do the actual work himself. In other words, for our sinful nature, there's a certain allure in the words of the song, I hope you know the song, in the words of the Big Rock Candy Mountain. Have you ever heard that song? All right. The Big Rock Candy Mountain, the place where there are plenty of cigarette trees and the hens lay soft-boiled eggs. And they hang the jerk who invented work and the short-handled shovel and all right. So the Big Rock Candy Mountain is not where we live. We live in a place that's amazingly fruitful, but there's work on the front end. Right? You have to be a long-term thinker. You can't be a short-term thinker. If you're a short-term thinker, you have the seed corn right here, why not consume it? If you're a long-term thinker, you're figuring out how much of this seed corn can I set aside and put in the dirt so that I can get a long-term return. So this proverb teaches us that aversion to work is not a damper to feelings of ambition. A person can be lazy and very, very ambitious in his emotional life. His emotions are ambitious, but it's not hooked up to the drivetrain. There's ambition, all right, but it's disconnected from an apt understanding of cause and effect. This means that ambition, unrestricted by any contact with reality, swells up to an enormous size. A person can be very ambitious watching shopping channels on television, daydreaming about, oh, if I had that, or if I had that, or if I had that. The lazy man wants, and he desires some more. But in the gracious providence of God, he comes up short. So God is being kind to everybody by not letting this guy have everything he wants. He hath nothing, it says. The ESV and the NASB both render desireth here as craves. The lazy man craves the goods. There's an inverse relationship between how much he wants and how much he gets. He wants it all, and he gets none of it. He wants it all, he craves it all, and he gets none of it. But flip it around. The soul of the diligent, it says, shall be made fat. The plain implication is Solomon's praise of deferred gratification. Solomon is praising deferred gratification. The soul of the diligent is made fat precisely because it is willing for lean times now. It leans into lean times now. If you tighten the belt now, you can let the belt out later. If you grab for everything you can get in the present, you will be forced into belt tightening measures later. It's either sacrifice now and enjoy the benefits later, or it's refuse to sacrifice now and have sacrifice imposed on you later, by the way the world is. So both the lazy man and the diligent man have desires. And both the lazy man and the diligent man are supposed to have desires. The diligent man postpones gratification of those desires, which is why those desires are eventually gratified. The man who does not postpone gratification, the man who wants it all now, is thwarted by his desire. He winds up with nothing. If you embrace nothing now, you get something later. If you embrace something now, you get nothing later. If you crave something now, it comes up empty later. I'll finish with the illustration. You probably have heard of it. If you haven't, you can probably look it up online. I think there have probably been variations on this experiment. I don't know who the demented psychologists are who come up with these things, but they do, and we learn from them. They took a bunch of kids, like preschool or kindergarten, real young kids, and brought them into a room and sat them down at a table and said something like, I'm going to have to leave for a few minutes. There's a marshmallow here. You can have the marshmallow if you want, but if you wait and don't eat the marshmallow, when I come back in just a few minutes, I'll bring a second marshmallow. You can have 2 marshmallows. If you wait, you get 2, but it's fine if you want to eat your one now. Okay? So you say, okay, well, the kids divided up, kids took different routes. There were the foolish kids and the wise kids. But this is the demented part. They then tracked the lives of those kids for the next 20 years. And son of a gun, you know what happened? This little incident with the marshmallow was a parable of what was coming. Okay, certain people got to have it now, and other people say, I can wait. That seems intelligent. So that's all.